Tonight on 16 by 9, a police officer meant to protect.
It was purely a hunter who would target children.
Luring children from the street.
It was open season for a pedophile.
And the victims still waiting for justice.
I think there should be some apologies.
And forging new frontiers.
Welcome to San Agustin. This cave is pretty damn cool.
In the belly of an ice cave. Then, a controversial photographer.
I think that there's photos I look back on and say I should have pushed it further.
Shatters the notion of childhood innocence. Here's Carolyn Jarvis.
Good evening and welcome to a new season of 16 by 9. We begin tonight with a story about a dark chapter in the history of St. John, New Brunswick, a secret that has been buried for decades. It involves a trusted police sergeant, vulnerable children, and a city that some say turned a blind eye. Now, 16 by 9 has uncovered a long list of victims who are speaking publicly for the first time. Here's Jennifer Tryon.
I was 6 or 7 years old.
The memories are more than 50 years old, but still terrifying.
I'd have toys playing in the cell. And that's where, it would start.
A jail cell and a trusted police officer with sinister intentions.
My sister and I would quite often go over to the police station and play with a lot of toys in their lost and found room. Or I could have the box of toys, have them all spread out on the floor in the cell. I would end up sitting beside him and then end up on his lap, and then from there, touching and kissing and sexual acts. I did all the sexual acts to him.
This man's identity is protected by a court order, so we'll call him James.
It went on for a few years, at least 2 or 3 times a week. It's like a broken picture in my head, a film that just keeps never ending. It keeps playing over and over.
The scene of that picture, St. John, New Brunswick, a small maritime city on the Bay of Fundy. Tides marking the passage of time, but not erasing the memories.
I have no desire to ever go back and live there. I don't think I could.
For James, it started in the late 1950s near his childhood home at this West Side Community Center and police station, where he met an officer named Kenneth Estabrooks.
Kenneth Estabrooks was a member of the police force, supposedly a real good police officer that, was always looking out for us in our best interest, so to speak, a friend of the family, and we were below the average income family.
But once Estabrooks lured James into that cell, the friendly neighborhood police officer became a sadistic pedophile, sometimes even leaving James alone in the dark.
Once in a while, he'd get mad at me. If I cried or made a scene or anything, I got upset. Locked me in the cell and turned the lights out and went outside and locked the front door, for like 10 or 15 minutes, would seem, but that seems like forever to a little kid.
Dave Perry has been investigating pedophiles like Kenneth Estabrooks for more than 35 years as a Toronto police officer and now a private investigator.
He was somebody that carried a lot of authority on the street.
Intimidating.
Very intimidating man. To have a 6'6" police officer in uniform, armed with a gun, is not a stretch. For him to even give a glance or a look, or to say one sentence to a child that would make them believe that they should never tell anybody.
For decades, he got away with it. Finally, in 1998, after James and others came forward, Estabrooks was charged with 6 counts of indecent assault, convicted of 4, and sentenced to 6 years in prison. But the trial raised ugly new allegations of a persistent police cover-up.
The police chiefs knew all about Mr. Estabrooks and his abusing kids for the last 20 years and didn't do anything about it. We can't have this coming out against the force. That'd make us look too bad. So we'll save the pedophile and to hell with the victims.
According to a former detective's testimony, Estabrooks had confessed to molesting 2 kids in 1975. But instead of laying charges, Chief Eric Ferguson let him off the hook. He quietly had Estabrooks transferred to a City Works job repairing tires and didn't bother to investigate further.
I think, like a lot of us, we wonder what happened and wonder why, he was terminated, not charged, but transferred over to a city garage. Those are all things that we're wondering about, for sure. If a case just like this came across my desk, and I'm still working at the Toronto Police Service in sex crimes, Ken Estabrooks would have been arrested immediately and prosecuted immediately.
Even after the trial, police still failed to do a full investigation to find out how many kids Estabrooks assaulted. But just last year, another victim came forward with explosive new allegations, uncovering long-held secrets almost too horrifying to imagine.
The abuse was far more severe than what was described in those particular court records. Ken Estabrooks was as sadistic an offender as I've come across in over 35 years of doing this.
Next, more crimes by Estabrooks and the victims that never got their day in court.
Kids are being raped on the street.
At the southernmost tip of downtown St. John, New Brunswick, there's a beach with an evil reputation.
Tin Can Beach, they called it. I don't know if that was the official name, but there's myths, there's legends, legendary stories that happen down at Tin Can Beach.
For nearly a year, 16 by 9 has been speaking with people who say they were snatched off the street as children and abused by former police sergeant Kenneth Estabrooks. We've uncovered the names of 40 victims and spoken directly with 10 who've never been heard from publicly. This man, who we'll call Ryan, is one of those victims.
I've seen people turn to alcohol. I've seen them turn to drugs. I did that myself. I mean, kids are being raped on the street.
Those horror stories stretch back to the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and until last year, there had never been an investigation into the full extent of sexual abuses committed by Estabrooks.
He simply, in the strongest terms, used his authority to falsely arrest, abduct, and confine people, and then sexually abuse them. That's what he did.
In August of 2012, the city of St. John announced they'd hired former Toronto police officer Dave Perry to find all of Estabrooks' victims.
It was learned that the allegations were against a former City of St. John police officer, Ken Estabrooks.
You recognize quite quickly when you're onto something that potentially is going to lead to something quite big. I would say it was purely a hunter who would target children, and they were children at the time, from the poorest communities.
This was the epicenter of those communities, the corner of Sydney and Britton Street.
If you lived on Britton Street, most likely you met up on this particular corner on Sydney. That was the corner.
From that corner, kids watched out for the police, and by the late 60s, the word had gotten out that Kenneth Estabrooks was a man to avoid.
We would yell at each other too. We would scream and say, "Here he comes, let's go." And if we didn't get out of there fast, we want to wind up in the car.
Ryan still has vivid memories of the first time Estabrooks came after him.
I was in Prince Charles School on Union Street. I can't remember if I jigged school that day, decided not to go, or just leave at lunch. And I got maybe 15, 20 yards, maybe a little more. And he was coming from behind me, and he did a U-ey, and he told me to get in the car. I turned around and I bolted, flew. I can still see the police car beside me. It was scary. After that, he remembered me. The stalking was very difficult to experience, not knowing if he was going to be around, looking behind you all the time. That was the terror.
Then, the terror he'd been living with suddenly became real.
Windows rolled down and you just go slowly. And you get in, I'll give you a ride home. I had to get in, he's a police officer.
Estabrooks drove Ryan down to Tin Can Beach, where he knew they'd be alone.
There wasn't any traffic, there wasn't any pedestrians. He parked there. There was a mirror. He could adjust his mirror to see who was coming behind. He was touching me, he was touching himself, and I just went someplace. You know, as today you look back, it was open season for a pedophile. I mean, kids were everywhere. When we used to go to bed at night in these tenements, there was two sayings. One, don't let the bed bugs bite. And they bit us. And the other was, don't let the boogeyman get you. And he got us.
People knew what was going on.
People knew what was going on, yes.
How many confirmed victims are there?
Well, we're not going to talk about numbers. We're leaving that till the end of the investigation.
We've spoken to people who say they know 50 or 60.
Yeah. Well, he was a predator, and he operated in those neighborhoods for a lot of years. So there's potentially a lot of men, a lot of survivors that we haven't gotten to yet.
Ryan says the worst part is the kids told police and social workers what was going on, and the people who were supposed to protect them chose to look the other way.
We say, you know, this guy is doing this to the kids. And they go, oh, are you sure about that? And, you know, we put the message out there. But, of course, it was you protected your fellow officers.
And he was protected right to the grave. Estabrooks will never face the full weight of the accusations against him. He served 6 years after being convicted of indecent assault in 1999 and died of cancer shortly after his release.
The saddest part here, I think, is that Ken Estabrooks is dead. We can't prosecute him. I think that would be something that all of us wish we could do.
So after decades of suffering in silence, Dave Perry says all the victims want is to finally be heard.
One of the reoccurring themes in all of this is that they just want somebody to acknowledge that it happened to them, and they want somebody to say that they're sorry. That's really what they're looking for.
Even though Estabrooks is dead?
Even though Estabrooks is dead, yeah.
I think it should be written. I think it should be told. And I think there should be some apologies.
16 by 9 made several interview requests, but the police chief never responded, and the mayor declined. So we traveled to St. John to see if he'd offer the apology so many victims told us they want. We caught up with the mayor, Mel Norton, on the street outside the law office where he continues to work while running the city.
Hi, I'm Jennifer from Global Television. I wonder if we could ask you a few questions about the Kenneth Estabrooks investigation.
I've got a meeting. Sorry to be jammed. I've got to get to a quick meeting right now. And, once I have a chance.
So you are prepared to answer questions about it?
Well, I guess what I said already is we'll set up a time.
Okay.
And somebody will get back to you for sure.
A few hours later, the mayor showed up at City Hall.
This is a statement prepared on behalf of the mayor's office, and it begins, we'd like to take this opportunity to express our deepest and most heartfelt remorse to the victims in this situation.
Along with that apology, the mayor says since the start of the investigation, they've heard from dozens of victims.
Folks that have been victims of what is, without question, one of those very dark and terrible moments in our city's history.
Estabrooks is dead, but there may be people who turn the other cheek. Is that part of it?
What we do know is that the investigation isn't finished, and all of those questions that you've asked, those all remain outstanding. And if there are other decisions that have to be made, then they'll be made at the appropriate time.
Precious few records remain, memories mostly, and a few grainy photos like this one of Ryan, taken nearly 50 years ago. A sad reminder of pain that will never go away.
To rape a child that's full of spirit and adventure and trust, and it's just cruel. It's just horrible. It shouldn't happen to kids.
And this story is far from over. 16 by 9 has learned some of the victims may sue the city of St. John, while the list of Ken Estabrook's victims continues to grow. We'll be right back.